Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Hartman. I'm the CIF's lead for nature-based solutions. I lead the program called Nature, People, and Climate. Very good to have you all here today. We have a really interesting session planned for you on an introduction to nature-based solutions. First, I hope that this will be the start of what we're hoping is a webinar series. And we're very thrilled to have the IUCN kick us off with an introduction to nature-based solutions. They are one of the foremost leaders in the world on this concept. So it provides us with a great baseline understanding of the approach. You'll learn today about IUCN's Global Nature-Based Solution Standard, how it addresses societal challenges from mitigating and adapting to climate change to protecting biodiversity and delivering ecosystem services at a global scale. A few housekeeping rules to start off with. Want to highlight there's a live translation function. You can see the interpretation at the bottom of your screen. Also, to let you know that the session is being recorded. And also, if you have questions, you can put those in the chat. All the participants are muted during the presentation, but their mics will be open during the Q&A that we have. And finally, when you do provide questions, it'd be great if you can include your organization in what you write or when you provide your question verbally. Just briefly on the agenda. So I'll kick off with a presentation on the CIF's Nature, People, and Climate Nature-Based Solutions Program. We'll then have Chris Buss from IUCN provide a broader overview of nature-based solutions. And then Dorsa Sheikholeslami of IUCN will present on nature-based solutions for societal change. This will be followed by our first of two Q&As, so you can ask questions on any of the speakers' presentations. After this, Verónica Ruiz of IUCN will present on what do nature-based solutions look like, and this will be followed by a second Q&A. IUCN will then close their presentation, and my CIF colleague, Neha Sharma, will briefly discuss our plans to create a knowledge platform for the Nature, People, Climate program, and then I'll close the meeting. So it's going to be an action-packed 90 minutes. So I want to now get started with a kickoff of my presentation. You'll wait. Oh, let me just put this up, and we can get going. Sorry about that. It's on the last slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm the lead for the CIF's Nature, People, and Climate Investment Program. Let me just move back this way. It doesn't seem to be doing that. A little bit of trouble here getting it to move back. 1 second. Apologies for this. I'm having a little bit of technical problem here, getting my presentation to move to the opening slide. Yeah. Yeah, let me just see. 1 second.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Hopefully that'll be the only technical issue we have today. As I mentioned, we're thrilled to have speakers from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, including Chris Buss, who's IUCN's director for the IUCN Center for Economy and Finance, Dorsa, who's the Nature-Based Solutions Program Officer, and Verónica, who is the Resilience Program Manager. So I first want to start off just with a brief overview of why nature-based solutions are needed. First of all, more than half of the world's GDP is dependent on nature. If you look at agriculture, food, and beverages, and construction, they are the largest sectors dependent on nature, and they generate $8 trillion in gross value added. It's also the case that by 2030, nature-based solutions can deliver up to 5 gigatons per year in carbon removals. This can come from the oceans, the forests, and other ecosystems, which can deliver up to 30% of the climate mitigation needed by 2050 to achieve our Paris goals. And nature-based solutions can generate a multitude of benefits, and they should be planned accordingly. So they should be designed in a way that factor in their ability to deliver greenhouse gas emissions reductions, climate change adaptation, resilience strengthening, livelihood development, and biodiversity conservation. But in order to meet our challenges for climate change, biodiversity and land degradation targets that have already been set require significantly more investment. According to UNEP, this is somewhere in the order of fourfold the investment that's being put into nature-based solutions right now. So there's a huge financing gap related to nature-based solutions. The CIF's program on nature, people, and climate is really looking at how to employ nature-based solutions to tackle in an integrated way the drivers multiple drivers of human activities on climate change and for land and coastal resources. So here you can see the types of approaches that will be generated that will generate benefit for the environment and people. On the left side, you see that the goal here is both to safeguard the environment, which includes sustaining forests, coastal and natural capital, reducing land-based emissions, and improving resilience of lands. In doing this, we'll also help to safeguard people by boosting nature-positive and equitable livelihoods, reducing community climate change vulnerability, increasing engagement of Indigenous people and local communities in climate action, and reducing disaster risk. The program builds on CIF's long history of working on land-based solutions. So for many years, we have a very mature program called the Forest Investment Program, which has provided $700 million to tackle issues related to sustainable forest management and emissions reduction from deforestation and degradation. The program has brought 41 million hectares under sustainable management in 13 countries. And it's innovated a very creative approach to supporting Indigenous people and local communities who are at the coalface of climate change through our dedicated grant mechanism. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. And the second program is on our pilot program for climate resilience, which is a $1.2 billion program that supports developing economies in building their resilience to the impacts of climate change. This program is not exclusively focused on land-based resilience, but there are resilience strengthening approaches that focus on lands, coasts, and rural people. So the goal of the Nature People Climate Program is really to break down the barriers and break down the silos between mitigation and adaptation, recognizing that many of the initiatives and activities that you might undertake for mitigation will have adaptation benefits and vice versa. And in doing so, thinking about how you can plan your investments, your activities, your initiatives in a way that maximize both the adaptation and mitigation benefits. As I mentioned, the program will include a dedicated grant mechanism that builds on the experience that we've had in the Forest Investment Program. The DGM is essentially the CIF's approach to working with Indigenous people and local communities. The program is led in the governance of the program is led entirely by IPLCs. These groups are both the leaders and the beneficiary of DGM activities, which ensures that funding is demand driven and attuned to the local interests of the communities where these landscapes are. So far, within our FIP program, we've been able to put out 600 sub-projects, 600 grants, and this has benefited 250,000 community members so far. So this is an example of how the Nature People Climate Vision plays out in the field. This landscape transition diagram shows genetic changes in land cover and the impact on natural capital across development gradients, from the remote hinterlands in the forest all the way down through the coastal areas. And within each of these areas, there are challenges and opportunities, activities that can be undertaken that recognize the interconnectivity of the landscape. So in the upper watershed area, this is where the biodiversity is usually, and where many of the most vulnerable communities are. So up top, you see that there are the threats to this area, just a few, are smallholder and industrial agricultural expansion, land conversion, biodiversity loss, issues with soil retention and sediment loads. And different approaches can be applied to address this, including mixed cropping in agroforestry, natural forest management, high conservation value forest and high carbon stock set-asides, and REDD. Moving down the landscape, you see the lowland intensification area. This is where the greatest amount of agricultural activity occurs, including many commercial commodities in the tropical countries. It's here that the boundaries are pushing in to that upland area as well as agricultural comes in, pushing into that forest area. And some of the challenges that we see here are both industrial agriculture and livestock, freshwater fisheries being affected, large farms, plus smallholder estates. And as I mentioned, this is where many of the people live, and you see significant livelihood vulnerability. Some of the approaches that could be piloted here include things like sustainable and regenerative agriculture, applying a sustainable supply chains lens to the way that the commodities are grown, agroforestry, reforestation, ecosystem-based adaptation, and integrated farming. In the peri-urban and urban areas, this is not an area, this is not a section of landscape where the Nature People and Climate Program will work, but it is impacted by what happens upstream, particularly when it comes to water. So there could be opportunities here for payment for environmental services. And then finally, the coastal zone. So here you see the impacts both from upstream, so the agriculture runoff, down-source pollution, nutrients from fertilizers, animal waste, pesticides, and other hazardous substances flow down into this area. But you also see the challenge coming from the other direction, in that climate change is increasing sea levels, leading to greater storms and storm surge, and increased salinity. So the goal of the Nature People and Climate is to really look at this landscape and identify ways to have integrated management, to identify those ways that will maximize the benefits for both adaptation and mitigation. And in doing so, we hope to achieve our goals. On the bottom, you'll see emissions reduction, land and community climate change resilience strengthened, and livelihoods improved. So just very briefly, we've had a call for proposals that went out last June. We received 48 expressions of interest that were submitted representing 55 countries. That's a third of the developing world. So we see great demand for nature-based solutions. One of the things that our independent expert group did notice is that while there's a lot of demand, there's still not a lot of awareness. And this is why we think it's important to increase awareness and bring on experts like IUCN today. The map shows the 10 countries that were selected into the program. Those in green were the first cohort of countries, which are the Dominican Republic, Kenya, Egypt, Fiji, and the Africa Zambezi River Basin region, which is led by Zambia. and includes Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, and Tanzania. And the 5 countries in yellow are those that are receiving money for investment planning, but we expect will be supported once additional resources come in. And this is Brazil, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Namibia, and Zambia. With that, I will stop sharing my screen. And let's see. Okay, I don't know why I'm not able to, oh, there we go. Okay, and with that, I'll now turn it over to Chris for some initial comments on the work that IUCN has doing. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks for the great introduction, not only to nature-based solutions, but also to the wider Nature People Climate Program. I mean, from our side, I think it's extremely exciting. Actually, it was interesting you referenced the Forest Investment Program. IUCN, members of IUCN, the Secretariat are involved in the initial design phase of the Forest Investment Program. Actually, I'm in Rome at the moment on the Forest and Farm Facility, which came out some of that thinking on how to mobilize smallholders, indigenous peoples around, and farmers. So totally linked, and great to see this moving on, and great to see the framing of nature-based solutions at the heart of this program. As IUCN, us and our membership have been at the heart of driving this forward. Dorsa is going to give a lot more context of that detail about how the concept has evolved, where it is at the moment, its origins and its standard, and this MBS standard that IUCN has developed is critical, because I think what the great opportunity here is to ensure that quality of nature-based solutions. We hear a lot about nature-based solutions and climate change, but it's also a challenge for nature-based solutions. We need to make sure we get it right, do it right, not just for nature, but also for people, and it's delivering the wider societal challenges that investment into nature-based solutions can give profitable solutions, and also looking at the wider societal challenges. It does help create jobs, it does support human well-being, it does drive economic prosperity, and actually makes sense. So obviously, so Dorsa is going to give that background. Verónica will then give some examples of it in action, and I think that's the exciting bit for all of us, is seeing how we move from the conceptual framework into action, and looking forward to working in partnership with all on this call and the Nature People Climate Program and World Bank to help deliver that quality of nature-based solutions. So I'll pass straight over to Dorsa. I'm really excited to be on this call, and we'll come in of sort of different points of questions and answers, and also to help with the wrap up as well. So thanks again to Paul and your team for the opportunity, and over to you, Dorsa.
Thank you very much, Chris, and also thank you, Paul. I'm Dorsa. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I would let me share my screen to start the presentation. So please let me know if you can see it.
Yeah, it's great, Dorsa. Yes, I can see it.
Great. Thank you so much. So we heard from Paul about the importance of nature in all the future development plans that we have, and also Chris emphasized on the role that nature-based solutions can work on this. So I will be getting into more detail about the concept of nature-based solutions, the origins, and the global standard that is developed by IUCN. But before that, just a few slides on the IUCN itself. What is IUCN? IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, is the world's largest environment network. We have about 100 state members as part of the union. We have around 1,300 non-governmental members and 25 indigenous peoples group. In addition to the membership, IUCN also has 6 expert commissions mobilizing the expertise and knowledge from over 10,000 scientists and experts from around the world, from the different thematic areas that have come together under the 6 IUCN commissions, working on sustainability, conservation, and sustainable development. IUCN implements projects. We are involved in projects in more than 160 countries. IUCN generates science and knowledge related to environmental management, and also is on the front line of policy policy development from national to global level. Given the areas of work that IUCN is involved in, we have become a standard setter for conservation and sustainable development. I'm sure you've heard about the red list of species, the red list of ecosystems, the key biodiversity areas, the guidelines for applying protected areas management categories, and of course, our focus today, the IUCN's global standard on nature-based solutions. Now let's focus on NBS. So why we started talking about NBS? How does the conservation actions have developed to brought us to this point? As IUCN has been on the front line of the conservation actions, we've observed this dilemma between conservation and development. There is this common sense that we cannot have both of them together, and we have to often sacrifice one for the other. However, the narrative has changed now. Going to the infographics on the left side of the presentation, that has been done by Stockholm Resilience Center from the Sustainable Development Goals. We see that economy is built on society and on biosphere, which means that we need healthy functioning ecosystems to be able to have a thriving society and a healthy economy. However, we also know that economy is the center of all the activities that we do, and we cannot forget about that. That has led to the concept of nature-based solutions. We believe nature itself, the ecosystem services that nature provides, has the potential to target societal challenges. In the meantime, also benefits nature. So people, society, and nature are the 2 pillars of nature-based solutions. We started talking about NBS back in 2009, when it's the first time that the term was used in one of the position papers that IUCN developed for the UNFCCC. The term and the concept itself began gaining traction in many of the activities that are conducted with IUCN and its membership and partner organizations. That led IUCN to have the need to develop a formal definition. So in 2016, through the IUCN's World Conservation Congress, we have the first internationally agreed upon definition of nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions began to thrive. IUCN supported the European Commission as an example to embed NBS into their Horizon projects. And it became to the point that IUCN started building a standard to help communicate on the principles of NBS and to have a facilitative process-based standard for design and implementation of projects, and also to inspire policy making. So in 2020, the IUCN Global Standard on Nature-Based Solutions was launched. I'll get into more details about the standard in a few minutes. Going back to the NBS definition itself, it's nature-based solutions is an umbrella concept that brings in the different conservation actions and ecosystem-based approaches under one umbrella. However, with MBS, we have added principles that can ensure the sustainability of the actions that we take. But how do we define it? We define it as actions to protect, restore, sustainably manage natural or modified ecosystems for addressing societal challenges effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity. Earlier last year, we had the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly adopting a definition on nature-based solutions through a UN system, which is the highest level of agreements that we can have. If you look into the screen, you'll be able to see that the words that are underlined are the words that are different, not different, but added basically to IUCN's definition, which also brings more credibility to the work that IUCN has been doing on MBS and the standard itself. But why is it important to have an agreed upon definition? So we have nature-based solutions which targets society and nature, especially highlighting that nature also needs to benefit from the process of the interventions we take. Then we have solutions and interventions such as generating clean energy through wind and hydropower. However, they do not give anything back to nature. They serve their purpose, but nature is missing from this specific solution. We call them nature-derived solutions. We also have concepts such as biomimicry that are inspired by nature, but also nature is left out of this intervention. So now we have the standard. This standard is meant to be a facilitative approach for design, verification, and upscaling of nature-based solutions interventions, and also to help for policy uptake and upscaling. The standard has 8 criteria and 28 indicators and was built through a rigorous round of 2 rounds of consultation, open consultation. We had more than 800 people and experts across 100 countries contributing and providing their feedback on the development of the standard, and in close collaboration between the IUCN Secretariat and the IUCN Commission, in specific the Commission on Ecosystem Management. This standard can be applied for 3 main purposes: for designing a solution, supporting decision-making for investment and financing, and informing the upscaling of impact. So what are these solutions? What are these criteria? Just a quick overview for them. The first criterion focuses on societal challenges. So again, we had the ecosystem approaches. However, we want to think beyond just the technicality of the action that we take, but how we design it, how we implement it, and how we make sure that we've learned from the previous mistakes, and also we can build on the achievements throughout the history of conservation and human actions for development. So, first of all, there is a problem to be addressed. We have, which is criterion 1, societal challenges. We have climate change mitigation and adaptation here, water security, food security, disaster risk reduction. Overall, right now we have 7 different societal challenges as part of the standard. Then we have the concept of designing at scale, which encourages the fact that we need to think beyond just our immediate intervention side, but not just geographically. We need to take into consideration the cultural impacts, the societal impacts, the future economy. All of them needs to be part of the information we use to inform our design, monitoring, and implementation. Then we have biodiversity net gain. our nature-based solutions interventions need to at least maintain or add to the biodiversity of the intervention site. Then we've got the other pillars of the society, economic viability, to think long-term on how we can make sure that the intervention we are applying to our site will sustain after the immediate implementation phase of the project. And we have inclusive governance to bring in the stakeholder engagement to have the voice of indigenous communities, indigenous peoples, local communities, vulnerable communities into our intervention, and also benefit from the knowledge and science that they have. Then we have balancing trade-offs. Since of course no intervention is perfect, we need to understand what is it that we are gaining and what is it that we may not directly benefit from this from the intervention that we are designing and implementing. Then we have adaptive management to ensure that we take into consideration, we are informed and we take into consideration all the positive effects on our project, and to be able to plan accordingly, short-term and long-term. And of course, mainstreaming for sustainability, which is meant to bring in, to share the lesson learned from our interventions, to communicate with others, through an international cooperation, I would like to say, and partnership. So we heard about the standard, but the standard itself has two other accompanying documents. We have first the standard itself that goes through the criteria and the indicators with examples and case studies. Then we have the guidance document that brings in the rationale behind each of these criteria and indicators. And finally, we have a self-assessment tool that accompanies the standard that helps you assess your intervention and understand its points of strength and the weakness that can be addressed. But more about the application of the standards in the next part of the presentations from my colleague Verónica. So here now we have the chance to talk about MBS, and we are here if you have any specific questions or comments.
Thank you, Dorsa. So I think we'll now open it up for the first round of questions. Perhaps we can unmute the participants or you can put your questions into the chat so that Dorsa, Chris, and I can answer them. So I see one question from the Adaptation Fund in the chat on the FIP's work with IPLCs, who is responsible for mobilizing indigenous communities, how are their capacities to address and financial management and sustainability mechanisms. This is a good question related to the governance of the dedicated grant mechanism. So in order to deal with that issue, there's a global program that's led by the World Bank, applying all the World Bank safeguards and dispute mechanisms. There then is within the FIP, the Conservation International is the global entity that leads the program. And then within each of the countries where the dedicated grant mechanism works, there's a national executing agency, including IUCN in one of the countries, and that they're responsible for all the ensuring that the fiduciary management is sound and supporting the steering committee in each country to as the steering committee wishes. So each country will have its own steering committee that's made up of indigenous people, local communities. They will determine how they want to grant and to whom and how much. So in some countries, they decided they got $5 million in grants, they decided to grant the entire amount to one in one grant. In other places, they've decided to grant individual farmers. So this is where the governance of the program is important. The responsibility to make the decision on granting is within the hands of the IPLCs, but the fiduciary management and the safeguards are within the boundaries of the country, the World Bank and the national executing agencies who are supporting them. Okay, it looks like there's another few more questions online. How does the local, okay, sorry, I'm just going through them. So how much grant per country for nature-based solutions? So this is, in the new program, we work through grants and loans, depending on the status of the country. If it's an LDC or a middle-income country, upper middle-income country, will determine whether they get a grant or a highly concessional loan. That loan is a portion of the IDA loan, so that it's there to be a sweetener. We work through our partners with the MDBs, and with them are trying to encourage greater investment in these projects. So the amounts at the moment are still being determined per country, but they should be fairly significant. Mike has a question for Dorsa on how issues of equity and justice are incorporated into the NBS standard. And then Chitembo, Dorsa has a question on, in the NBS standards, does it blend with the resilience building to climate change? How is that working?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So I would like to invite Verónica to take these two questions. Vero, you're on mute, because I know that you are very involved in the humanitarian sector and also as the resilience manager. I think you're best fit.
Thank you, Dorsa, for putting me in the spot. So in the sense of equity, there is Dorsa, she was explaining when going through the different criteria of the standard. There is criteria number 5, which is on governance, and you will see you have 5 different indicators within this criterion, which are very specific into matters related with indigenous peoples and local communities. So how to engage with them, how to, as a minimum requirement to be aligned with the UN DRIP and also with FPIC. So these are like the criteria number 5 is really the one which is addressing climate justice, equity, and engagement of all the stakeholders that must be involved in a nature-based solution. So what will be offered to you is more that I go really through the whole standard, because you will see all these indicators are very well explained, and you can find some specific resources on this regard. And then in terms of resilience, the question fits quite well. And I can give a little bit of detail, but at the end of the presentation, the 2 cases that I will be present is on coastal resilience and climate change from one of the World Bank projects. So the standard itself is not targeting any specific sector, let's say, and it can be translated into different ones. So resilience, of course, is one of them, and then climate change, you will see, is across the whole standard and trying to put in place not only environmental and social safeguards, but also to have some sort of climate type of proofing for any project. So you will see later, it will be much easier for you to see how this applies in a real case study.
Thank you, Verónica. I see Africa Zanelli with her hand up. I would also encourage, just to remind you that we do have translation. So if you have a question in French or in Spanish, we can respond to that as well. It'd be great to hear from the countries. Appreciate Chitembo's question, but it'd be good to hear from those who are actually trying to implement this on the ground. Yeah, with that, maybe we can unmute Africa to ask her question.
Hi, Paul. Thank you very much for the opportunity to raise that question. I did put it in the chat, so I thought you can access that. It was just, as you know, I'm very interested in what happens at the community level and at the national level with regards to the role of females in the area which is so crucial, which is nature. The percentage of women in agriculture and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to get an impression from IUCN, whom I'm very fond of because of their very effective gender policy, as to how they're going to address those issues. I think I'll leave you to that because you've got really quite a lot of things to go through. So if I can just have an answer to that issue, please. Should I read the question from the chat or you?
Yeah, I saw the question and then I saw your hand go up, so I thought I would just call on you. But yeah, you had mentioned the OECD has produced a report of environmental funds with 0.04 going to women, and you've asked how this is being addressed and changes in communities where women, including Indigenous women, are being overcome. So maybe our colleagues at IUCN might respond to their approach to engaging women within the NBS initiatives.
No, Chris, Dorsa, you are silent. I don't know if you want to come over or.
Yeah, I can. I mean, I think, and thanks, Zanella. I think probably, to a certain extent, I mean, there's two bits to this. There's the application of the standard, and how we make sure, as Verónica mentioned previously, the inclusive governance. Inclusive governance ensures there's a gender balance in there, and that's part of the delivery of the actual standards. So within that, there's gender is a critical component of that to make sure we're addressing your concerns. We do have elements that we're being supported by Canada to develop a more in-depth standard around gender and nature-based solutions to really enhance that focus. But also, actually, Paul, I'd throw a little bit of it back to you as well in relation to some of your targets that you set in MPC around how some of your funding are going, because MBS isn't just solely about the specific projects, it's also about an approach. So it's how we're making funding responsive to those needs. I think it's also a question to you, Paul, as well.
Sure, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I mean, I think, the important thing is to look at, I mean, within the nature, people, and climate, as I always say, people are in the middle. And the focus here is on how do you engage in people, how do you engage Indigenous people, how do you engage local communities, how do you engage to ensure that there's social equity as well. And not just that it's a focus on environmental management independent of that, because those two things go hand in hand. So I think clearly, we do have gender targets. I'm happy to share the results framework with you. But more than that, I think, a real active approach to engaging and focusing on livelihoods as a key indicator of the program is quite important to recognize. Obviously, we're a climate finance mechanism, so our core indicators are around adaptation and mitigation. But we also, as I mentioned, are looking at the multitude of benefits that this can generate, and clearly livelihoods and women's livelihoods within this space are critical, as are biodiversity benefits, which is not something that we're explicitly targeting, but ensuring that we have this very strong focus on livelihoods is a key component of the program. And obviously within that, there's a lot of need for social inclusion, a lot of needs for equity. The CIF very broadly is looking at these issues through a just transition lens. As I mentioned, we're also trying to target this through our dedicated grant mechanism. We've had good success within the FIP in ensuring that women are beneficiaries of that grant mechanism. So we are trying to ensure that these funds will flow down to local communities and specifically to women. there's a question in the chat from Ina about how often we're planning for the call for EOIs. So we did, as I mentioned, have a call last June. We had very good response to that, very high demand. From that process, our independent expert group recommended 21 EOIs be considered by our trust fund committee, our board. And from there, the initial 10 are being financed. So I think, you know, at the moment, we don't have any plans for another EOI because there are other countries on that list. There are other ways that we can support countries. And, you know, one of the things that we want to do, which my colleague Neha Sharma will talk about later, is a learning platform to bring in all countries that are interested in MBS to learn from the experiences of the program, to share knowledge around it. We also are trying to do this in in-person events. So we have an Africa Knowledge Exchange for our FIP and PPCR program that's involving our Nature People Climate program in Africa the week of March 6th. Our colleagues from IUCN will be there as well. So we are trying to find ways to make sure that we're bringing in more countries to benefit from the knowledge and from the lessons that are being drawn from the FIP, the PPCR, and from the Nature People and Climate program. Okay. So I don't think I see, and yeah, my colleague Charlotte has put a link to the MPC program so that anyone who would like to learn more about it can click that link. Okay, so thank you, Liz, for reflagging your question. So Liz is asking how the CIF's MPC program is influencing other parts of CIF programming, including urban. What share of the program is spent by the World Bank versus other banks, the current size of the MPC versus need, and how CIFs impact wider bank lending outside the fund. So yeah, you know, I think the MPC came out after our trust fund committee determined that the CIF should develop some new programs. So we have 4 new programs that have come out: the REI, the ACT, MPC, and a cities program. So in terms of cities, as I highlighted, we're not explicitly working in urban and peri-urban areas, but we are looking at opportunities for complementarity. We will see a cities program come out from the CIF, and it'll have a similar approach, from what I understand, in that it'll be looking both at adaptation and mitigation. The financing and the leads of the programs have not yet been determined. I mean, the World Bank obviously is one of our 6 MDB partners, and will be taking the lead and playing a part in a number of the countries, in the 10 countries that have been selected. We have shortly to determine our allocation per country. The program has about $360 million in it at the moment. That'll be divided in some way, shape, or form between the countries that have been selected. Somewhere between 7 and 10 countries will receive this funding because we try to work at scale. And at that point, we'll know you know, who's in the lead, and from that process that the countries and the MDBs go through, they develop an investment plan, and that investment plan then will turn into projects. And who will lead those projects will be determined at a later point. So the exact amount that the World Bank versus other banks will receive is not yet clear. Obviously, we are looking at opportunities for wider engagement of the private sector, of other donors, a complementarity with other financing mechanisms. So I think the goal here, and this is really, you know, what the CIF is set up to do, is to provide grants or very cheap financing and encourage additional financing to come in so that we can work at a significant enough scale in a country to have impact. who is the concessional financing provided to? Yeah, so it's provided to the governments. That's correct. From Al-Qadab. So it's, as I mentioned, it's either a grant or a loan, again, depending on the status of the country and how indebted they are. And we have a pricing policy that indicates where each of the countries falls, and the rates of the loans, which I mentioned are a percentage of the IDA loans. So we can provide IDA loan percentage to middle income and upper middle income countries, whereas they're not able to tap that financing through the bank itself, let's say. So this is one of the benefits of the CIF, is to really provide a sweetener to encourage other banks to come in and bring their loans. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. If I missed them, please raise your hand. If anybody has any questions, you can also raise your hand. Can you provide a link to gender statistics? Yeah, we'll work on that, Africa. I don't think that's available right now, but we'll engage our social inclusion people to be in touch. With that, I will now turn it over to Verónica, who will continue the presentation and talk a little bit more specifically about the work that IUCN is doing on the ground in the WACA region. So Verónica, please, over to you.
You can go next, Dorsa, please. Okay, well, there was still kind of few presentations before I was taking over, but I can go through this one as well. So as Dorsa has been mentioning, we have the standard itself, but together with the standard, we have two other complementary, let's say, tools that come with. In one side, we have the guidance, and the guidance is where everything is explained, how to understand each of the criteria and the different indicators. And in the other side, in the other hand, we have the self-assessment tool. So this self-assessment tool is done easy than an Excel so far, and where you can have all the different indicators followed by some orientation questions, and then you will be able to give the different scores according to the adherence to the MBS standard. So far, how the self-assessment tool has been used. So first, whether to assess if an intervention or a proposal adheres to the standard. So here we are in the design phase before the implementation. Then we have another type of use, which is more about like verifying if in which way during the life cycle of our project we are in adherence to the standard, or if we need to take any corrective measures to be in adherence. Always if we really want to have an MBS project, if we are working on another type of project, it won't be the case. And then third, also when we have any project that will close and we would like to scale up or replicate the approach, but in alignment with the global standard, then we can use in this sense. And here is where we can find what are the different areas for improvement. And it's very important to remind that the standard is not a tool for policing practitioners, but rather a facilitative tool. A facilitative framework for helping identify these areas where maybe we have some weaknesses, but also what are the areas where our projects are really strong, and then we can really build upon. So far, the self-assessment tool and the standard itself have been applied across the world. So right now, for example, in Oceania, we have our colleagues over there with a massive granting mechanism called the Kiwa initiative, which is providing funding for small-scale projects or nature-based solutions, particularly for coastal communities. Then we move into Asia, where the standard has been applied in mountain ecosystems, particularly with a clear focus on climate adaptation, using approaches like ecosystem-based adaptation. And then we move into Africa, where there is like the explosion of different types of approaches within nature-based solutions that have been used. for water management, dryland management, coastal resilience, and so on. And then we move into in the Americas as well, where here we have clear examples of how nature-based solutions and the standard has been applied in conjunction with the private sector, particularly with the coffee and cocoa sectors, and working directly with some private companies. And as you can see, we are going from Oceania to Latin America, so across a diverse range of ecosystem, even though always when we talk about nature-based solutions, the primary ecosystem which come to our minds are mangrove, because they are the most visible ones and are one of the most that we have much more data, and together with forest. Next slide, please. And there we are. This is how the standard look like, the self-assessment tool looks like. But we are working in an online version that will be available by this year. So then everybody who would like to test their pilots are invited to use it. And then you will have finally a score and the level of adherence of your action, pilot, project, strategy, and what is the level of adherence with the MBS standard. Next slide, please. And this is, let's say, this is like the resume that you can see when applying the different criteria and the different indicators. You will have a table that will help you in understanding what are the criteria that or the criterion that you really need to rethink and rework, and maybe to find some corrective measures if you want your project being in alliance with the MBS standard. And we have 4 categories, let's say 4 different type of scores. So we have a strongly in adherence, then we have partially adequate and insufficient. And in these different ways, then you can rework your project strategy or pilot application that you are working on. Next slide, please. So now we have explained you the standard itself, this facilitative framework. We have the guidance, we have the tool, but how the standard and its application looks like on the ground. So as Paul mentioned, IUCN, we are engaging in the West African region, and we are working together with the World Bank in one of, let's say, biggest project that IUCN is working right now, the West Africa Coastal Resilience Project. This is a program which is trying to boost the transfer of knowledge, foster political dialogue among the different countries in the region. So far, we are targeting 17 countries from all the coasts from Mauritania to Gabon, but also in order to mobilize public and private finance to tackle coastal erosion, flooding, pollution, and climate change adaptation. So what we did in this case, we work in 3 of the primary WACA countries. We work in Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and Benin. And with them, we have a full year work plan in going from training on how to apply the MBS standard and the self-assessment tool, and then to really go through their different actions, on-ground actions, and really screen them with this tool to understand whether if the proposed actions they were in adherence or not with the standard. And then from there, trying to see like how we can move forward. So I will give you 2 examples that are quite different. So we have first the case of Senegal. Senegal has been applying the nature-based solutions for a longer time. And here the focus in Senegal was to focus on 3 societal challenges. So disaster risk reduction, the sea level rise, ecosystem degradation and biodiversity loss, and also food security. So what we did in Senegal, here is the specific case of the Langue de Barbarie, which is in Saint Louis, an area which is getting flooded constantly, even in a monthly basis in Senegal. So here, as you can see, the nature-based solution is not only a single apply action, but rather as a combination of multiple actions. So we have going from dune fencing, going from regenerative application of some of the endemic species, and then also going into more working directly with gray infrastructure, but also bringing on board the aspect of training, capacity building for sustainable land management, and the monitoring and evaluation of these different activities. Next slide, please. So after applying the self-assessment, okay, you can go next, please. After applying the self-assessment tool, what we realize is what I'm saying. The case of Senegal, they have been really working on nature-based solutions even before they start the beginning or the start of the WACA project, which is mainly focused on gray infrastructure. So that's why, if you will see here in this table, almost all the different criteria are all of them are in adherence with the standard, which means that now Senegal is thinking about like what are the next steps for this project, and also how to build on the lessons learned from this application. So this is the positive side, right? Like when you see like, okay, our project is in adherence, so also we can find what works well, and maybe they may still have some areas where they need to be improved. But for example, if you were not sure if your project is a nature-based solution or not, here you will see you are fully on adherence, so you can have your goal and giving the MBS, let's say, level to your project. But then we have a different case. It's the case of Côte d'Ivoire. In Côte d'Ivoire, we found a different scenario, also working with the national team. Next slide. And here the focus was on mangrove rehabilitation and plantation. The aim of this action was to stabilize the shore of the Grand Lagoon and thereby to reduce the effects of the erosion of the target pilot sites, different pilot sites identified in the Grand Lagoon, and to manage the existing ecosystem in that area. So going beyond, and again, what I was mentioning, going beyond a specific ecosystem, but rather to working at the landscape level, integrating different ecosystems, mangroves, sand dunes, and a coastal forest. But here you will see, here you find that this is a difference compared to the slide that I was showing with Senegal. In this case, the feasibility study report that we work with the team outlined that the expected result of this mangrove restoration, positive result of the mangrove restoration, but it is very little linkage to the monitoring and evaluation of the intervention. Then you will see a specific one, which are the criterion number 7, which is very important in terms of monitoring and evaluation. Something which is very relevant when working on nature-based solutions, because we really need to take adaptive measures, particularly in the case when we work under different climate change scenarios and climate change pressures. So in any case, you will see here there were some criteria that they were not in adherence with the standard, but even though at the end the full screening of these actions show us that this is a nature-based solution which is partially in adherence with the standard. And here you will see that it is really pointing us out on where are the weaknesses and where we should be paying attention if we would like our projects to be an MBS or to be replicated as an MBS. In this case, we have the economic feasibility, which is also because of the lack of analysis of what are the different economic options for mangrove restoration. It was in this case, and also here the balance trade-off. And this is giving also because not all the different possibilities they were they were identified. So it was difficult to find like then what could be the different trade-offs in between the different stakeholders that are affected by this action. So what is important then is like this was an exercise of ongoing projects, but now the importance is like now we are moving into a replication, and then is where we will be in the design phase, and then we will be learning from this result. So what is the major lessons learned that we extracted by this exercise? In this case of Côte d'Ivoire, is like in the next phase, a learning framework should be planned to accompany the communities in the appropriation and mastery of the planning techniques, because it was something that was lacking, together with a stronger analysis of the different options in the case of rehabilitation and planting of the mangroves. And these are two very, let's say, completely opposite examples, but of course we have so many more. We have been applying the standard almost for 30, 40 pilot applications, also in the sense of connecting with the great infrastructure, and we are happy to give you more details into this and sharing more links with all of you.
Thank you very much, Verónica. Dorsa, do you want to take the lead in facilitating questions here, or shall I do that?
I am happy to do that, Paul, but if you also feel comfortable, please continue. Okay,
fine. Thank you. So again, we throw the floor open to our participants. And I'll again mention we would love to hear from those of you working in our partner countries to ask any questions. You have an opportunity here with some world experts on nature-based solutions, so don't be shy. We've provided translation. Hopefully that'll make it easier for you. But this is your chance really to ask the questions you want, everything you always wanted to know about nature-based solutions, but we're afraid to ask. I see one question that's come into the chat from Liz, asking about the Nature People Climb MPC project and its impact on transformational impact on other systems. And this is a really good question, and thank you for that, Liz, because one of the challenges I think with this approach is that it's cutting across numerous systems. So there's food systems, as you mentioned in your comment. There's water systems, agriculture, coastal, and really, I think what's important and what we've been talking to with our team here that's focusing on transformational change is to really have a line of sight of how the systems are operating, and then what the contribution of these programs can be. So we hope as we move into the countries start moving into their investment planning phase, that they in their planning that we can help support them in thinking about the systems that their landscapes fall into and how this is contributing to change. I think more specifically, one of the things that we really think is key to the approach of the MPC program is that it's about breaking down the barriers between adaptation, mitigation, and the planning of initiatives. So really thinking about planning instead of planning just for and this has been mentioned by our IUCN colleagues as well, a mitigation program, an adaptation program, and a mitigation or adaptation initiative, really thinking about the landscape, where the entry points are for both, understanding the trade-offs involved. If you maximize mitigation, you might be losing a little bit on adaptation and vice versa. So understanding how to think about these two things together, and in doing so, hopefully maximizing the benefits that these will have for the natural systems, for biodiversity, and for livelihoods. I see another question that's come in. what types of activities and which components within these projects, if any, have attracted the most private capital triggered by concessional lending. We often hear that it's difficult to attract private capital to adaptation, including MPS. Another very, very good point, and I have to admit, we have been challenged on the land-based side as well to bring in private capital within the CIF's Clean Technology Fund. Obviously, there's been a clear line, and it's generated a very high leverage rate and lots of engagement with private capital. I think one of the things that we'll have to take from the experiences of the FIP and the PPCR is how to improve our pipelining of projects for concessional finance. So at the moment, with our forest investment program, we're going through a midterm evaluation. One of the specific questions that we've asked the evaluators to look at is around private capital projects and how to attract that, how we can do better. And we hope to take those lessons forward into the MPC. But I'll also turn this over to colleagues at IUCN and to share their thoughts, Chris, maybe on how you see these initiatives attracting private capital.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, to your response. I think I'm not too sure on the three specifics in the examples we got. I imagine, just from my understanding, although Verónica and Dorsa might be able to give, that the private sector funding was very limited in there, perhaps around the smallholder, some of the smallholder engagements, perhaps. But I think I'll refer to this concessional lending, and I've just got a couple of slides after this, which actually does talk about some of the concessional lending for nature-based solutions. But I would also just turn around that question a little bit, because it relates to the transformation as well, because we're trying to transform systems here. So the private capital that goes in is existing private capital, but being invested in a different way. So for example, if you're investing in, let's just say, artificial inputs into an agricultural system, well, why not change that to reduce soil erosion or soil conditions, soil fertility, or enhance soil fertility? Then why not put that into natural systems, into natural processes, into nature-based solutions to enhance your soil productivity, regenerative agriculture, for example. So I think that it's slightly, so when we talk, the question about transformation and the question about finance is also how do we redirect finance into nature-based solutions. So when we talk about 30% of the solution, we're not just achieving 3 or 4%, we're actually achieving that 30% of and a lot of that is existing funds that need to be redirected.
Great, thanks very much, Chris. I'm gonna see if there's any other questions. Please raise your hand if you'd like to provide it in English, Spanish, or French, or add to the chat. And if you can, remember to include your organization so we can document that as well. I don't see any other questions. If you're inspired, you can always put it in the chat. But with that, I think I will then turn it back over to Chris to share some of his closing thoughts. Oh, one more question. Okay. So there was one question about who the concessional financing is provided to. I thought I'd answer that. It is provided to the governments.
No, this is a question from Liz around working at landscape level, and what lessons can there be about wider enabling environment for leveraging private sector.
Okay, you want to take that one, Chris?
Yeah, I can take perhaps I think the second bit I think also relates to what we talked about the redirection of finance, Liz. I'd say that the landscape level question is always a challenge. It's how people define landscapes. I always say that that landscapes are social constructs, and where your influence is very critical on that. The sort of transboundary framework is much more the regulatory framework that exists. So across the landscape is where an investment there is where do you receive your returns. So for example, if you're a water company, your landscape is massive, and you will be looking to invest in nature-based solutions throughout your watershed, river basin, etc., where you're going to reduce perhaps the impact on your hydropower turbines as you reduce siltation, for example. I think those are very good examples where you can bring in. I think the infrastructure is a great example. Actually, I've got a slide coming up that talks about the benefits of and the returns on infrastructure from applying nature-based solutions.
Great, thanks, Chris.
So perhaps we should just jump into that.
I think I was going to suggest you just jump into that,
yeah.
and take it away. Thanks. And again, if anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box.
Thanks, and yeah, thanks to Paul for again the opening framing of this in relation to the MPC program, and that much appreciated Dorsa and Verónica for the context of nature-based solutions, but also the examples. So I've got the session of what is next and a bit of a wrap up. Well, I think what is next for nature-based solutions is if you're talking about is I think what we're seeing in the first place is we're definitely seeing a shift in policy, and we're seeing a shift in joint action. We've got at COP15 and UNCCD, the Ramsar Convention. We saw it at CBD and the Global Biodiversity Framework. The references and the integration of nature-based solutions has been fantastic. So we're now seeing that momentum, and hopefully that momentum will drive both public and private finance. We saw it also from COP26, the links being made with nature and climate, then through to COP27. And the vast amount of conversations that were being made in Sharm el-Sheikh around nature-based solutions, but also the commitment from the Egyptian government as well. They've launched the ENACT initiative, which is enhancing nature-based solutions for accelerated climate transformation. And that's really looking to scale up the role of nature-based solutions in climate solutions, but also much more broader in the protection and resilience to climate impacts of vulnerable people, actually driving sustainable agricultural systems, regenerative agriculture, land management, restoration of land, but then also the mitigation, but also making sure that when we're doing the mitigation processes, we are looking at the wider implementation of conserving, restoring the carbon rich, so terrestrial systems, which actually then is seeing carbon as a co-benefit rather than the single driver for nature-based solutions. We also looking, I think, as the next step is looking at knowledge and how we look at knowledge. I think in the last few questions that I just started referring to is how you shift and transform systems from grey infrastructure to greener infrastructure. And there's some great work that's been done, that have referenced 11% of natural infrastructures have changed from grey infrastructure to green infrastructure, saved 248 billion each year out of the provided of the 4.29 trillion that is needed, and swapping over infrastructure can create also additional benefits that reach out, so almost doubling the 248. So if we're investing over the next few years and seeing a large infrastructural swap across the globe, we can be saving hundreds of billions each year in relation to generating benefits, but also saving money, such as the watershed management, etc. So these are some of the figures that are needed to come out to generate that knowledge, to shift the decision makers into thinking more widely about how they integrate nature-based solutions into their public and private finance. So we're seeing that shift in reallocation of funds in the direction of nature-based solutions. And then finally is also generating new finance, which goes to the concessional finance. We're now seeing a lot of, these are just examples from IUCN, where we're seeing examples of GEF as a Nature Plus Accelerator Fund, or GCF, the Subnational Climate Fund, or the Germans on the Blue Natural Capital Finance Facility and Global EBA Fund. We're seeing a real shift in the design of concessional, blended finance, which provides TA support, action on the ground, but also developing equity funds and concessional finance to provide those first loss early risk investments. So it's and all of these we're seeing are underpinned by application of the nature-based solutions, whether it be in agricultural systems, whether it be in green infrastructure, etc. But in the portfolio that we have, we're looking to mobilize over $1 billion in private finance. As for these, what I hate the term pilot, but these opportunities of initial finance. So really, in the way we're moving forward now, we're seeing the policy shifts moving forward, that whether that be in wetlands, whether that be in climate, whether that be in biodiversity frameworks, we're then seeing the real generation of knowledge and understanding and the role and value of nature-based solutions, and we are beginning to see the movement of concessional finance, that is supported, underpinned by both public and private investments to mobilize that and start moving the needle in direct finance. I think also the last sort of point in finance is making sure that it makes business sense as well. So if you're restoring your land, what's the reason for doing it? You're doing it also for your business and that longer term climate resilience. So you're not just, and you're focusing, it's helping you enhance your yields over the longer term. So I think those three elements are really the direction of travel that we see, and it's great to be here listening to some of the comments of the framing around the MPC work, and we'll be excited to work with many of you in the future, whether that be at programmatic level or more specific project level, of helping apply the assessment tool, understanding of the MBS approach, etc. I think it's very exciting. So again, thanks very much for the opportunity, Paul, and the CIF team, and thanks for everyone for joining.
Terrific. Thank you, Chris and Verónica and Dorsa, for those terrific presentations. Before I hand it to my colleague Neha, I did see one question from the DRC asking when we will have our next expression of interest call. So as I mentioned earlier, I don't think there's an immediate plan. I will say that the DRC did submit in the first round, which is good. So you're part of the program in that regard, and it's a nice lead in to what Neha has to mention, because we want to engage with all the countries who have shown interest in nature-based solution. As I mentioned, there was really great demand, and through these types of webinars, where we're bringing in world-renowned experts like IUCN and our plans for a knowledge platform, we hope to be able to continue to share lessons and understanding on NBS. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Neha, who is the lead for our evaluation and learning team at the CIF, to share a little bit about our plans going forward. Over to you, Neha.
Thanks, Paul, and it's really a pleasure to be here today. Paul, you made my work easy because you've explained a little bit already what the learning platform will be, but I'm just very pleased to be sharing with you this idea of NPC learning platform that we are planning to launch. And the intention is really to carry forth the objectives of the evaluation and learning initiative that's housed at the CIF into the NPC program. So the objectives of the evaluation and learning initiative are to generate new evidence, apply that learning, and foster partnerships. A lot of the questions today were about CIF's impact, both within the CIF, but also outside of the CIF. And we do that through these, through work on different themes and through learning partnerships. So the learning platform of the NPC will carry forth these objectives. We intend to hold virtual and in-person events, bringing together partners such as the IUCN, working across. I really liked, Chris, your sort of 3 pillars there that you showed on finance and on policy and on knowledge. So bringing forth learning into the MPC program across those 3 pillars through contributions through our different partners through the learning events, but also do some analytical work on a demand-driven basis. So we'll ask the partners, including the countries that are participating in the NPC or are interested in nature-based solutions, what type of gaps they're seeing in terms of additional analytical work that needs to be done. And we'd have some opportunities to fund that work and have partners carry that forth. So that's the idea of the learning platform. We are going to be looking to the people attending this webinar and other partners to share with us what types of events or knowledge work they'd like this learning platform to pursue. So please, if you already have ideas, feel free to reach out to Paul and me to share different topics or themes or ideas that we can then take forward through this learning platform.
Thanks so much, Neha. So something to look forward to. And again, I want to thank our colleagues from IUCN for their terrific presentations today. I'll also flag that this is the first of our CIF Nature Series webinar. We do hope to have a number more going forward. We're currently talking with the Adaptation Fund, who can, we're hoping will do a webinar on the elements of good adaptation project development, which we hope will be useful as well to the countries and the partners on the call. But with that, I'm going to bring this first webinar to a close. And again, thank everyone for participating. Thanks to so many people who have taken part and asked good questions, challenging questions, and keep an eye on this space for the Nature People Climate as we move forward into our program and project development. So thanks very much. And we'll be in touch again soon with information on the next webinar. Thank you very much.